Most wars are remembered. Their battles are studied, their generals praised or blamed, and their victories carved into stone. But some wars are buried, lost beneath the noise of history, overshadowed by larger conflicts, forgotten by textbooks, yet powerful enough to change the world. This is the story of a war that almost no one talks about anymore. A war that shaped nations, shifted alliances, and silently rewrote the map of the modern world. This is the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, one of the most important yet least remembered conflicts in history. It began with ambition. At the start of the 20th century, two rising powers stared at each other across the frozen lands of Manchuria and the waters of Korea. On one side stood Russia, vast imperial, confident that its size alone made it unstoppable. On the other side stood Japan, modernizing at lightning speed, hungry to prove itself as a global power. Both nations wanted control over the same territories, and there was no room for compromise. Tensions simmered. Diplomats talked. Threats were exchanged. But beneath all the words, both sides knew the truth. War was coming, and then, without warning, it began. On a cold night in February 1904, the Japanese Navy launched a sudden attack on the Russian fleet anchored at Port Arthur. The world watched in shock. Japan, a nation once dismissed as weak and isolated, had struck first against a European empire. From that moment on, the war raced forward with astonishing speed. Japan moved with precision. Its soldiers were highly trained, disciplined, and fiercely motivated. Its navy was modern, fast, and deadly. Russia, meanwhile, struggled. Its armies were far from home, its supply lines stretched thin, and its government slow to react. And yet, despite all odds, both sides refused to back down. The fighting was brutal. Battles raged across mountains, frozen fields, and coastal fortresses. Port Arthur became a symbol of desperation. Russian defenders held out behind massive walls, while Japanese forces dug trenches, built artillery positions, and launched wave after wave of attacks. It was one of the first major wars to use modern technology: machine guns, heavy artillery, telegraphs, railroads. In many ways, it previewed the horrors that would come later in World War I, but the world wasn't paying attention. Not yet. The turning point came at sea. Russia sent its Baltic fleet, almost the entire navy, on an 18,000-mile journey around the globe, a voyage that took months. By the time the fleet reached Japan, the sailors were exhausted. Supplies were low. Morale was crumbling. And the Japanese Navy was waiting. The Battle of Tsushima became one of the most decisive naval defeats in history. The Russian fleet was destroyed almost completely. In a single day, the balance of world power shifted. Russia was forced to accept peace. Japan emerged victorious, and the world finally understood that a new global power had risen. But the impact of this war didn't end with the treaties. In Russia, the humiliation triggered riots, protests, and a political collapse that paved the way for the Russian Revolution 12 years later. A revolution that would create the Soviet Union and shape the entire 20th century. In Asia, Japan's victory inspired independence movements across the continent. Nations under European rule saw hope for the first time. They understood that empires could fall. And in military academies around the world, generals studied every detail of the conflict. They learned new tactics, new technologies, penned new strategies, knowledge that would be used on a horrifying scale during World War I. Yet today, very few people know about this war. It is overshadowed by the global conflicts that came after, forgotten beneath the weight of 2 world wars. But its consequences still echo through modern politics, borders, and international power struggles. This forgotten war changed Russia. It transformed Japan. It inspired Asia. It warned Europe. And it prepared the world without realizing it for the storms that were coming. The Russo-Japanese War may not fill history books, but it shaped history all the same. And that is why we tell its story. Because sometimes the events that matter most are the ones the world forgets.